City taxes and trees, hidden costs of alleged climate resilience. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and recently both Calgary and Edmonton city councils have approved tax hikes, and some people are not very happy about it. So one of the things that seems to not be part of the conversation in the tax hikes is the climate plan for each of these cities and their extensive objectives of building out their urban forestry plans. And that's what I'd like to discuss with you in this video. Follow along with me, see what we've found. So Calgary and Edmonton tax hikes hit in hard times. Edmonton approves a 6.6% property tax hike and Calgary a 7.8% tax hike. Both cities claim there are benefits to taxpayers. So in Edmonton, they're claiming a bigger police budget, new bus service, expanding library services, and that the police budget accounts for the biggest piece. In Calgary, they're adding $90 million for housing-related capital funding, for public transit, 65 new transit officers, and $6 million for the city's mental health and addiction strategy, and $16 million spread out over 4 years to improve the city's cycling and pedestrian pathway network, which will be 4,000 kilometers. So where you see commerce and innovation through the climate lens of City Hall, they only see GHG emissions. Where you want jobs and a powerful economy, they want to plant trees. And why is that? Because they're also aligned with how to reach net zero. And according to the federal government, what is net zero? Achieving net zero emissions means our economy either emits no greenhouse gas emissions or offsets its emissions, for example, through actions such as tree planting. But in fact, cities have no international mandates, according to Robert Lyman. Their mandate is to serve the local city, the municipality that they're elected to serve, except the one they have self-imposed. And yes, here is the former mayor of Toronto, David Miller. He's written a book called Solved: How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate Crisis. And he's part of the C40 Cities, which is a global network of mayors of the world's leading cities that are united in action to confront the climate crisis. Of course, the C40 Cities is an offshoot of Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities program, which funded climate resilience officers around the world at various cities. One of those cities is Calgary. C40 City climate mentality is everywhere. Now, this is a report that was written in 2016, and it was called Deadline 2020. Don't you think that's a bit odd? The objective in the report is that the C40 cities by 2050 are going to have 0 tons CO2 equivalent per year per person for emissions. Now, in Canada today, personal per capita emissions range anywhere from 17 to 14 tons CO2 equivalent per person. So this is already rather low. And they want to get it to 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent per person by 2030. And they claim that to remain within a 1.5 degree temperature rise, this is what they have to do. And so all the cities are trying to do this to you. They're trying to reduce your carbon footprint to 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent per person by 2030, or to plant equivalent trees. And which country has a 2.9 ton CO2 equivalent per capita carbon footprint? Well, Vietnam or Cuba. This is from the Alberta government about Calgary's emissions. You can see that even in 2020 lockdowns, emissions did not fall. Much of this is immeasurable. These are estimates of 8.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions from producers emitting over 50 kilotons in 2021. But in fact, we have to think that in the global context, Canada, the whole country, emits in a year and 8 months what China emits in 1 month. Yet lockdowns destroyed the lives of many and many small businesses. To what extent was it actually about CO2 reduction? You see, in 2015, Ivo de Boer was the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the political arm of the climate movement within the UN. And he said the only way the 2015 Paris Agreement can achieve a 2-degree goal is to shut down the whole global economy. And this report, Exponential Roadmap, was released in September of 2019, and they wanted to halve emissions by 2030. And of course, during the lockdowns, the World Economic Forum was the only group in the world cheering it on, saying lockdowns are quietly improving cities around the world, when in fact cities were totally gutted and many people died because of it, because of despair. So it appears that cities are trying to plant enough trees to offset their growing populations. And this seems to be a hidden factor, even though it is reported online, but it seems to be a hidden factor within urban budgets. And first of all, I'd like to talk a bit about Calgary. You know, Calgary is up on, it's on a fairly high plateau. I think it's about 3,000 feet above sea level, and very dry. It's right on the edge of the Palliser Triangle, so it is a drought-prone region of the country. Plus, it also gets very extreme weather changes throughout the year because of the Chinook effect. It's like a föhn wind that comes up over the Rockies, and the temperatures, especially in winter, can change really dramatically. It can be like minus 20 degrees Celsius, and within a few hours, when a Chinook wind blows in, it can go up to, say, plus 20. Everything's melting and it's all wonderful, and people are driving around in convertibles with the top down, beep, beep, you know, very happy for a couple of days. Then it'll freeze up again. So you can imagine what that does to trees. They don't thrive in that kind of environment. So it's a very difficult environment to plant and grow trees successfully. And that's partly why large parts of the city, especially up toward the airport, which is on a more exposed area of the city, it's not very treed. They're trying, but it's a difficult thing to do. And you can see this right here on the city's website, that the city has approximately 7 million trees located on both public and private lands, in parks, natural areas, and green spaces. This is a remarkable and valuable accomplishment. In our arid climate, trees are not a natural feature of our landscape, save for riparian areas along rivers. So that's important to keep in mind, because we're actually pushing against the wind, if you like, when we're trying to plant a lot of trees in Calgary. So to offset emissions, cities are planting trees. Both Edmonton and Calgary value the urban forest at over $1 billion as an urban asset. I'm not quite sure how they arrive at that figure, but they That's what they say. And people love trees, of course. They say as part of the 2022 One Calgary public engagement, 89% of Calgarians were satisfied with urban forestry. Well, maybe that's because they don't really think about how much it costs. It actually costs $10.34 for public tree maintenance cost per citizen. And you can see that cost has gone up from $9.70 in 2022. So it looks like here the City of Calgary is spending $16.9 million on urban forestry and $4.7 million in capital costs for 2023. And of course, everyone's a tree planter, save the planet. So the city has a branching out tree program. And again, they're increasing the urban tree canopy. They say that trees are an intrinsic part of the quality of life in Calgary. They provide a myriad of environmental benefits, positive mental well-being. Trees help us connect with our communities. And so the tree canopy is presently 8.25%. This includes trees planted on both public and private property, and the city's working to grow and expand our tree canopy coverage to 16%. And you can help with the Branching Out program. And they say that trees are provided at no cost by the City of Calgary. Well, it costs somebody money to get those trees that they can give away to citizens in the city to plant. And I believe in the last Branching Out program, people had to meet them at a LRT station and take their trees home. So I guess there would be no additional greenhouse gas emissions for taking your trees home to plant them to save the planet. Anyway, so it's a participation kind of project, and fine, but somebody pays for those trees that they give away. That's you, the taxpayer. And hey, Edmonton is going all out. Edmonton announces an 8-year plan to plant over 2 million trees. And they say the federal government is spending $47.9 million on new tree planting initiatives across Canada, including in Edmonton. The money received by the city will be used in conjunction with the $67 million already approved by Edmonton City Council. And here you have a whole bunch of volunteer tree planters out. So both cities claim their urban forests have asset values in the order of $1.2 billion. But when I talked with our forestry consultant, he had this to say: street trees are little more than urban garnish, sort of like serving a hamburger with a scrap of kale. At least you can throw the kale away, but not so with street trees. Once they're planted, they have to be maintained. The cheapest thing in any urban forest program is planting trees. It's also about the only aspect of the program that the popular media reports on. Once a tree is planted, it must be managed and maintained. Most public plantings are never visited again. And the key point here is the aggregate costs of a maintenance program quickly exceed the cost at planting. He told me that trees need maintenance for about 25 years. So if you plant a tree today and you have to budget at least a 25-year maintenance program, and realize that given the climate and plantings sites in large urban centers, that at 25 years, you will likely only have 20 to 30% survival of the original planting. Those trees that have died or been removed will have been replaced. And remember that the planned 55,000 plantings per year that is publicized in the Edmonton video will, after 10 years, result in a maintenance program for over 500,000 trees. Most cities neglect factoring that into their glossy videos with smiling student volunteers. So this is the Edmonton tree planting video that he's referring to. You can see it online. And he's talking about some of the numbers they cite there. 290,000 plantings since 2013. That's an annual program of about 20,000 plantings, which is less than half of the planned 55,000 seedlings promised in the video. Edmonton's target is to have planted 2 million trees by 2050. But let's see the maintenance budget for such a plan. Given the attrition rate, that will realize a standing crop of between 400 to 500,000 trees. And then he discussed the costs and perils of urban forests. First of all, where is the tree canopy of Edmonton? Well, part of it's in the river valley, of course, but it says here the Edmonton video presents its plan in a way that suggests that it is trees on city property that are responsible for the urban tree canopy of Edmonton. Baloney. The vast majority of the urban tree canopy is on private property where trees tend to be better tended and last longer. The big lie. Many woke urban forest lovers will start waving their hands about when talking of the quantitative but unmeasurable value of trees to the city. Urban foresters will rarely talk about the costly disadvantages of street trees, liability in car accidents, damage to transportation, damage to electrical transmission and sewage system, damage to street drainage, damage from insects and other pests. And here's a picture of Snowmageddon or Snowtember in Calgary when we got a sudden blast of snow and just dozens and dozens of tree branches came down. Lots of trees were very seriously damaged. So were roads, and it was a big mess. So our forestry guy had a better idea. Reduce the property taxes on treed and maintained private properties. A challenge. So if the city really thinks that urban trees have some advantage and want a cost-effective program, I suggest that property tax should be reduced using an equation proportional to the tree canopy growing on the property. Do that, and they would never have to plant another tree or maintain a diseased population. Question for municipal planners and management. When planners and staff start talking about their planting programs and good ideas, what is the attrition rate of your planting? What is average life expectancy of a planting? What is the 10-year maintenance budget associated with an annual planting? And here in Calgary, they are saying, comparing our service, this benchmark compares a municipality's budget for maintenance of public street and park trees with the size of its population. Tree maintenance costs include inspections, structural pruning, watering, tree removals, tree protection, and pest management. Calgary typically spends less than most Canadian cities with similar climates. The data source is Yardstick, an international parks and recreation benchmarking organization operated as a partnership between private sector and industry groups. So you can see that it's $10 approximately per citizen in annual maintenance costs. But in talking with our forestry consultant, he said that the true cost of tree planting and maintenance is closer to the $40 figure for Melbourne, and that this would apply in most Canadian cities as well. But more trees equals more costs. So I don't know if people have had a look at the 2023 to 2026 climate implementation plan, but they should, because they want to improve the urban canopy to strive for the city target 14 to 20% by 2058. So that's a lot of trees, along with all the things that I just mentioned, a lot of costs. And then you also have to ask about the valuation of trees in the $1.2 billion area. Is the city cashing in on your trees? So apparently there's this organization where you can get carbon credits for city trees. And I guess that would help you count to net zero, wouldn't it? Anyway, this is part of an Arup biodiversity cities by 2030. This was done in conjunction with, of course, the World Economic Forum. And they say that carbon and sustainability leaders such as Microsoft, PayPal, Bank of America, Jonathan Rowe's companies, and Cloverly have purchased or funded urban forest credits and projects. Carbon programs are now underway in 16 cities across the United States, and the country's city forests provide 18.3 billion in benefits per year. This value is expected to grow if urban areas continue to embrace city forest credits funding opportunities and expand their tree cover. So will your city cash in your urban forests for carbon credits? There's a thing that's happening actually at the beginning of January. The Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States is looking at potentially approving the creation of natural assets companies. You may or may not be aware of this. There are a couple of examples in Canada that are operating right now. One is the Darkwoods Project, which is Nature Conservancy out in BC. Basically what they do is they take a chunk of forest, they say, okay, we're not going to cut this forest, it's not going to be burnt down, we're going to guarantee it for 100 years, and we're going to sell carbon credits based on that. And same with Great Bear Rainforest, which everyone thought was protecting the rare Kermode bear. Well, it turns out it's actually just a way to cash in on carbon credits. So some of these things are operational right now, but the objective in the long term is really to turn all natural assets like trees and water and undisturbed forest, undisturbed ranch land, grassland, wetlands, into commodities that people will be paid for, but to do nothing with. So this is kind of problematic because it starts to take away property rights. It puts these properties into the hands of entities that are not private citizens. And in the long run, who knows what really happens to these properties? And why should nature be commodified in this way? So I think it might be worth your while to look into this. You know, it's something that Canada is quite big on as well. The federal government has a whole website devoted to nature-based climate solutions. And basically, I think what it boils down to is they realize that the carbon tax will not reduce emissions. And, you know, they've set these very extreme targets for emissions reductions that are impossible to meet. So one way to meet it is then by saying, oh, well, you see, if we don't cut this tree down, it will absorb all the carbon. So that's a nature-based climate solution. And if we have this ocean here that is protected, that will absorb carbon dioxide. And so we can trade on that as well. And this is kind of unending. So it's important that you look this up and know what's happening. You know, and it looks like cities are part of this whole deal, doesn't it? And of course, recently, the federal government wanted to turn Edmonton's River Valley into a national park and take over management of it. Now, maybe that was so that the federal government could pretend to have planted their 1 billion trees, 2 billion trees, whatever it is that they're trying to reach, by taking over this park and then claiming, see, we did it, we have all these trees. But a lot of people in Edmonton objected to that. They want to keep it in the hands of the city, of course. So there's quite a bit of chutzpah going on at City Hall. How dare you expropriate my private trees for carbon credits? In the tree canopy inventories that the city runs, iTree, there's no distinction made between city tree and private tree contribution to the urban forest. So the city charges you to plant their street tree program and then expropriates your privately planted trees' carbon for carbon credits. And you have to realize that the carbon market is based on the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. And that's from Mark Shapiro's article in Harper's, February 2010. Get hold of it. It's very interesting. It will give you lots of insights into this crazy shell game. One thing I do want to mention is that cities improperly use an implausible scenario in their climate risk analysis. So this is the scenario. It's called RCP 8.5. It's totally implausible because it would require that the Earth burns more coal than exists and uses more oil than is known to be recoverable. So that's not a rational scenario to use. And once we remove that, you can see that the climate emergency is over. We do have time to deal with environmental and climate change issues. We don't have to freak out and do these crazy things. We don't have to try and make our urban forests really huge. We don't have to skim taxpayers for trees. So if you want to know more about Alberta's climate future, please read our report, Facts versus Fortune Telling. In this, we are rebutting the work of Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who consulted to a number of cities in Alberta. And she uses RCP 8.5 as well. She uses this as her baseline, business as usual. This is not business as usual. This is implausible. It's an outlier. So read our report. We show you 100 years of climate history in Alberta. Gives you a whole new perspective. We also did some reports on City of Calgary's climate plans. This is before the present council with Mayor Gondek and their climate emergency plan. But this will give you some historic background. And you see what happens is by the 5th century, men were ready to abandon civilization itself in order to escape the fearful load of taxes. I believe that quote comes from Joseph Tainter's book, which we referred to in these reports. Tainter wrote about the collapse of complex societies, and he went through history and looked at it. And he found that one of the things that usually happens when a society collapses is when the society has become quite complex and starts to demand more and more taxes from its citizens to pay for non-useful things, things that don't benefit the daily life of that person directly. So, you know, when you think of city taxes, you want to have paved streets. You know, you want to have decent signage. You want to have the snow cleared in winter. But do you want to have the city running around planting thousands of trees? Is that a priority? You know, when they're claiming that trees help mental health, but they only have a mental health budget of $6 million, but they're spending $16 million on tree planting and forestry management, you know, maybe priorities are not in the right place. And I know that a lot of people will be mad at me for doing this video because people seem to have an almost compulsive love of trees, but one that seems to be quite exaggerated, especially in the climate context. You may disagree with me, feel free. We have some other materials as well. We objected to Calgary's climate emergency declaration. So this report is on our website. We've done a number of videos rebutting the call for the climate emergency declaration in Calgary. One is called Pathways to poverty. And that's what it is. And of course, this one is about 15-minute cities, and that was Mayor Sohi's election platform in Edmonton. So you might want to look at those. And just to give you a bit of insight from the other side of the country, we also have Ottawa's climate plan, The City's War on Drivers, Homeowners, and Businesses by Robert Lyman. And also the International Climate Science Coalition has recently done quite a bit of very good work on Ottawa's climate change plan and how these climate plans and energy plans would ruin the city and kill thousands of people. That might sound exaggerated, but I really recommend that people have a look at that, because you can't really understand how fragile our energy system is until you start to tinker with the electrical system and the heating systems, and then all of a sudden things fall apart. Now, probably the cities are using this RCP 8.5 because also banks and bond markets use it. So we've just issued this report, which rebuts the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions on their standardized climate scenario exercise, which is also based on the implausible RCP 8.5. And if you wonder how that got proliferated, it's because of these green billionaires who wrote a report called Risky Business, and it proliferated through all financial markets. Again, using the implausible RCP 8.5 as a business as usual case. So if you enjoyed this, if you found it interesting, insightful, maybe you can help us out, please join us or donate. You can go to our website, friendsofscience.org, or send us an e-transfer. You know, 10, 20 bucks, every little bit helps. It should be clear by now that politicians can't stop climate change, and it's just going to cost us more and more money. So we've all got some challenges to meet in the new year, and one of them might be that people should go down to City Hall and see where their money's going. It should be clear to people, and I don't think it is, that there are a number of environmental non-governmental organizations that are funded for millions of dollars to sway public policy at City Hall. So if you're an ordinary tax-paying citizen and you wonder, why is it that City Hall keeps coming up with these crazy ideas, and even when I say no as the citizen, they go ahead and do it? Well, it's the influence of these environmental non-governmental groups. They're multi-million-dollar funders, and their network of people, you know, and City Hall is a fairly easy place to access. It's not like provincial or federal government where often you have to be a registered lobbyist, or maybe you have to travel quite far to go and get your voice heard. City Hall is a place where you actually can have your voice heard, and you're probably, you know, neighbors with your ward councillor or alderman, right? Or so you might even know them. You might have been in business with them. So it's a place that is quite accessible, but this is the problem, in that these very well organized environmental groups and climate activists, they have a network of people that they've established who work very hard on lobbying the city government to go the way that they want them to go. And that may not be the way that you want City Hall to go. And it's also always going to cost you a lot of money on pet projects, many of them that you would never have voted for if you knew the cost. And I'm sure the urban forestry project is something along that line. I love trees, they look great, but they cost money. And in hard times, people need to be more frugal and just deal with the real issues that people need. That's my opinion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We're going to post it on YouTube, and I'll post the PowerPoint on the blog as well so that you can go through and see the links. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope everyone has a good 2024. Let's fight for the things we all want. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.